In the quiet stretch of northern Georgia, tucked behind moss-covered trees and winding two-lane highways, lay a town called Willow Creek. Small, dusty, and steeped in old traditions, the town hadn't changed much since the 1960s, except now there were more trucks than horses, and the local diner had a touch-screen register. But some things didn't change. The line between black and white folks in Willow Creek was invisible, but deeply felt. It wasn't spoken about much anymore, but it was in the glances, in the silences, in the fact that the west side of town had cracked pavement, and the east side had fresh paint and flower beds. Elijah Carter lived in a small wood-frame house by the edge of Willow Creek itself. The water ran slow and muddy behind his backyard, and the wooden bridge that crossed it had been built when Eisenhower was president. Elijah, a black man in his 30s with wide shoulders and kind eyes, had lived in Willow Creek all his life. He inherited the house, and the reputation of a quiet man who could fix anything, from his grandfather, a preacher who once marched beside Dr. King. Elijah ran the only independent auto garage in town, Carter's Repair, though he mostly worked contract jobs for Rick's Auto and Tire, owned by a war-hardened, sunburned white man named Rick Sullivan. Rick never said anything racist. He didn't have to. His silence said plenty. The people of Willow Creek didn't hate Elijah. They just didn't know what to do with him. He was smart, polite, and always ready to lend a hand. But he was also a reminder of a truth they'd rather ignore, and a strength they'd rather forget. That all changed one summer morning. It was July 19th. The sun had barely crested the treetops when the children boarded the school bus heading toward a summer camp retreat at Echo Lake. It was an annual event for local families, a chance for the kids to escape the heat, play in the woods, and let their laughter bounce off the hills. The bus was packed. 37 kids, 2 chaperones, and a driver named Carl Bennett, a white man in his 50s, built like a barrel and always humming old country songs. As the bus creaked over the old wooden bridge that connected the east side to the county highway, something cracked. Literally. A splintering sound, sharp as lightning, cut through the morning air. The front tires dipped suddenly. The wooden planks beneath the wheels shattered. Screams erupted. Then the whole bus plunged sideways into the muddy, fast-moving water of Willow Creek. People heard the crash from blocks away. Elijah was underneath a lifted Ford F-250 in his garage, changing the fuel line, when the sound reached him. It wasn't just a crash. It was a gut punch, a noise that made your bones stiffen and your instincts kick in. He dropped his wrench, rolled out from under the truck, and ran. By the time he reached the bridge, a crowd had started gathering. Parents, workers, retired folks all staring at the wreckage, a yellow bus half submerged, smoke rising from the engine, and dozens of children trapped inside or floating downstream. Nobody moved. The water was high and fast. The bank was muddy. No one had a plan. Elijah didn't wait. He tossed off his shirt, kicked off his boots, and dove in. The water was like a punch to the lungs, cold and heavy with silt. But he swam hard toward the nearest child, a boy no older than 7, flailing and gasping. Elijah grabbed him, held him tight, and kicked toward shore. When he reached the bank, people were shouting, "There's more in the back! Some are still inside! The driver's stuck!" Elijah didn't respond. He dove back in. Again. And again. And again. He pulled out 5 kids in the first 10 minutes. Then a girl named Katie, barely conscious, her blonde hair plastered to her cheeks. He laid her down on the grass and began chest compressions. Her lips were blue. Her eyes lifeless. "No," Elijah muttered, pressing harder. "Come on, baby girl. Don't you quit on me." 30 seconds passed. Then she coughed. Water spurted from her mouth. She wailed. Her father, Deputy Tom Harlan, arrived moments later. A tough, square-jawed man with a rigid stance and a deep distrust of Elijah types. He nearly collapsed when he saw his daughter breathing in Elijah's arms. Their eyes met. Time stood still. "Thank you," Harlan said. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Elijah nodded once and stood back up. He wasn't done. In the next hour, he saved 12 lives. He dove into that creek until his muscles cramped and his arms shook. He pulled out kids, soot-covered, panicked, waterlogged. He helped others climb from the broken bus window. He freed Carl, the driver, whose leg was pinned by twisted metal. When paramedics arrived, Elijah was still in the water. The crowd clapped. Some cried. And for the first time in Willow Creek's recent memory, people didn't see Elijah as the black mechanic. They saw him as a hero. But Elijah didn't want headlines. He didn't want applause. As reporters arrived, as cameras flashed, he slipped away, wet, bruised, and silent. He walked back to his shop, alone, put on a clean shirt, and finished the work on the F-250. The town of Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people talked much. But after the bridge collapse, silence was impossible. The footage spread fast. A drone clip from a local news team showed a soaked Elijah Carter hauling children from the river like it was his life's calling. And maybe it was. Social media, for once, did something useful, turning an invisible man into a hero overnight. The headline on Channel 7 read, "Local mechanic saves 12 in bus tragedy." But even the biggest font couldn't capture what really happened. The bridge collapse had shaken something loose. It wasn't just the rotting wood that had snapped. It was history. Memory. Guilt. On the Monday after the collapse, Elijah showed up at Rick's Auto and Tire like he always did, wiping his hands with an old rag, nodding to customers, sliding under a beat-up Dodge like his muscles didn't still ache from dragging bodies through floodwaters. Rick didn't say much. Just handed Elijah a cold Coke and said, "You did good, kid." That was Rick's way of saying thank you. It was the closest he'd ever come. But while Elijah tried to live like nothing had changed, Willow Creek couldn't. People were different now. They waved longer, spoke louder, crossed the street to greet him instead of looking the other way. The mothers of the children he'd saved brought casseroles and home-baked pies to his doorstep. A few even left notes. "Thank you for saving our baby. We owe you everything." Some signed them. Some didn't. It didn't matter. Elijah read each one carefully and kept them in a shoebox beside his grandfather's Bible. The most surprising change came from Deputy Tom Harlan. A week after the accident, Tom pulled up to Elijah's place in a patrol SUV. The same man who once walked past Elijah in the grocery store without a nod now stepped up with his hat in his hand. Elijah met him on the porch. "I brought something," Harlan said. In his hand was a sketchbook. Inside were drawings by his daughter, Katie. Crayoned images of Elijah standing tall in the river, holding kids, smiling under the sun. In one, he had angel wings. Elijah turned a page slowly. "She won't stop talking about you," Tom said. "You're her hero." Elijah looked at the page for a long time before closing the book gently. "She's a good kid," he said. "Real brave." Tom hesitated. "I didn't see you right before. I see you now. And I want to say," his voice cracked, "I was wrong. About a lot." Elijah didn't need an apology. But he respected the man for saying it. From that day forward, something shifted between them. They started fishing together. Nothing formal, just two men, rods in hand, speaking little, sharing silence. Tom brought coffee. Elijah brought patience. Sometimes they talked about Katie. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all. Meanwhile, the town council announced they would rebuild the bridge using emergency state funds. It would take months. But the plans were in motion. Engineers arrived. Cranes moved in. Construction tape lined the banks. During a town hall meeting, the question came up, what do we name the new bridge? Dozens stood up and shouted the same answer. The Elijah Carter Bridge! But Elijah stood, calm and tall, and said, I don't want my name on it. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs spread like wind through grass. I didn't save those kids for recognition, Elijah continued. Name it something that means something to everyone. Not just me. Name it after what we're all trying to build. Name it hope. The room went still. Councilwoman Mary Lou Jackson, who had lived in Willow Creek her whole life, wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered into the microphone. I motion we name it the Bridge of Hope. It passed unanimously. From that moment on, Elijah became more than a hero. He became a symbol of healing. Not just between black and white, but between past and future. Between silence and truth. But healing comes at a price. Not everyone liked the change. One morning, Elijah found a message spray painted across his garage door. Stay in your lane. Red paint. Angry letters. A scar across what had become a sacred space. Rick arrived first. He saw it and said nothing, just went to the back of the shop, grabbed a power washer, and started spraying. Tom Harlan arrived next. No words. Just a grim expression. He started scrubbing too. Then, one by one, the townsfolk arrived. Old Mrs. Callahan brought buckets. Teenagers with spray bottles. The same people who once looked past Elijah now worked to erase the hate from his door. No police report was filed. Elijah didn't want it. He believed something deeper was happening, and it couldn't be solved by courtrooms. That night, Elijah sat on his porch, watching the fireflies dance over the creek. His grandfather once told him, "The most dangerous thing about hate isn't the noise, it's the silence that follows it." But for the first time in his life, Willow Creek wasn't silent. Not anymore. For every person who embraced the change sweeping through Willow Creek, there was another who watched in silence, their jaw tight, arms folded, waiting for the tide to turn back in their favor. One of those people was Earl Buck Kinley. Buck had lived in Willow Creek his entire life. He owned a lumber yard on the edge of town and sat on the board of the VFW Hall. His family had roots deeper than the creek itself, and an ideology just as murky. Though Buck never used slurs in public, his opinions were known in private conversations at the diner, whispered between coffee sips and backward glances. So when the town renamed the bridge Hope, Buck scoffed. "They're just trying to rewrite history," he told his hunting buddies. "Man jumps in a river, now he's Martin Luther King." The others chuckled nervously. Not all of them agreed, but Buck had a way of pulling people in, especially when they didn't want to be left out. As construction of the new bridge progressed, so did tensions. Elijah remained humble, quiet, focused on his work. He turned down media interviews. He refused offers from politicians. All he wanted was peace. But change doesn't come quietly to places like Willow Creek. 2 weeks before the new bridge's opening ceremony, Elijah's garage was broken into. They didn't steal much, just smashed his grandfather's framed church photo, slashed some tires, and spray painted "Not a hero" in jagged black letters across the walls. Rick called the sheriff. Tom Harlan showed up personally. "Elijah," Tom said, standing in the ruins, "I swear I'll find who did this." "I believe you," Elijah said calmly, sweeping glass from the floor. "But I ain't gonna stop living because someone's scared of change." "You shouldn't have to clean this up alone," Tom said. "I'm not," Elijah replied. And he wasn't. That afternoon, more volunteers came, white, black, old, young. They brought hammers, paint, new tools. Rick rebuilt the door himself. The church choir donated a new photograph. A man from Atlanta sent brand new equipment with a note that read, "Heroes deserve clean hands." Still, not everyone was ready to move forward. Buck Kinley started handing out flyers. "Keep Willow Creek ours." He claimed the bridge was being renamed as a political stunt. He said tradition was under attack. He pushed the idea that Elijah was just lucky, not brave. And some listened. On the morning of the opening ceremony, protest signs popped up along the road. "Real heroes built this town. This isn't about race, it's about pride. Keep history honest." Tom Harlan tore down the ones near the courthouse. "I've got a daughter who owes her life to that man," he growled. "You want to talk history? Let's talk truth." The mayor, a nervous man named Will Dorsey, considered canceling the ceremony. It's too hot right now, he said. What if there's trouble? Elijah was asked to stay home. But Elijah said no. I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to witness the good we're trying to do. You can't fix nothing if you don't show up to the work. So, on the day of the dedication, he stood at the back of the crowd in a clean button-up shirt, arms folded, eyes steady. Hundreds came. The choir sang. The new sign, Bridge of Hope, was unveiled in polished bronze. Then the mayor stepped forward. I want to invite the man who reminded us all what courage looks like, Mr. Elijah Carter. There was applause. Some hesitant. Some roaring. All eyes turned. Elijah stepped up slowly. He didn't carry notes. He didn't clear his throat. He just spoke. I didn't jump in that water thinking about race. I saw kids drowning. That's it. I didn't ask what color they were. I just jumped. He looked around. Even Buck Kinley stood off to the side, arms crossed. I know some folks think this bridge don't belong to me. That I didn't build it with my hands. But let me ask you, who's it for then? Is it just for folks born on the right side of the street? Or is it for every person who wants to get across? Silence. Then murmurs. Then clapping. Then standing. Elijah nodded once and stepped back. The dedication went on. But something had shifted again. Later that evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek, Elijah sat by the riverbank. He watched as Katie Harlan and her friends rode bikes across the new bridge, laughing, fearless. Tom walked over, 2 beers in hand. You spoke the truth today, he said. I wasn't trying to make a speech, Elijah replied. Tom took a long sip. That's why it mattered. They sat in silence for a while, just watching the water. But not everyone was watching peacefully. Buck Kinley, sitting alone at the bar that night, tapped his fingers on the table and muttered, This ain't over. And somewhere deep in the quiet corners of Willow Creek, old anger stirred. It began with a whisper. Then a rumor. Then a spark. A week after the bridge ceremony, someone torched a black-owned grocery store on the west side of Willow Creek. The fire started just after midnight. The flames spread fast, devouring decades of history in under an hour. No one was hurt, thankfully, but the message was clear. The next morning, Elijah stood in the ashes with the store's owner, Miss Bernadette. She was a small woman in her 70s with iron in her voice and no fear in her bones. They think this'll scare me? She said, brushing soot from her shoulder. Child, I marched in Alabama. I stared down dogs. This is smoke. Nothing but noise. Elijah admired her strength. But he also saw the fear in the eyes of the younger kids watching from the sidewalk. A fear he remembered from his own childhood, the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize the world doesn't always want you to survive. That same day, Sheriff Franklin held a press conference. He stood stiffly behind the podium and declared the fire a suspected act of arson. No suspects. No names. No progress. Tom Harlan wasn't satisfied. I know who's behind it, he told Elijah that evening as they fished from the riverbank. Buck? Elijah asked. Tom nodded. Can't prove it. But it's him. He's been stirring up the old boys. Men like Johnny Ray, Clovis Dean. You know the type. Elijah did. They were the ghosts of Willow Creek, men who smiled in the daylight but carried hate like an old family recipe. Handed down. Carefully preserved. Served cold. What are you gonna do? Elijah asked. Tom stared at the water. What I have to. That weekend, Tom called for a town meeting. He didn't ask the mayor. He didn't go through protocol. He just posted flyers around town and waited. The town hall filled fast. White folks. Black folks. People who never showed up to meetings before. And Buck Kinley, front row, arms folded, jaw tight. Tom stood at the podium. We've had 2 crimes in 3 weeks, he said. One aimed at Elijah. The other aimed at Miss Bernadette. We know what this is. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The room stirred. Buck stood slowly. You accusing me of something, deputy? Tom didn't flinch. Not officially. But I am saying this. If you're behind what's happening, I'll find out. And if you're not, you best speak to the men who are, because this ends now. The room held its breath. Buck let out a slow laugh. I fought for this country. My father built that grocery store back when half this town was dirt roads. And now we're naming bridges after mechanics and letting cops accuse citizens without proof? Tom stepped forward. Your daddy didn't build that store. Miss Bernadette's father did. Your daddy just refused to shop there. A hush fell. The truth hit like thunder. Elijah, sitting in the back, said nothing. But he felt it. The tide was turning again. And this time, it was rougher. That night, someone shot at Tom's house. A single bullet through the front window. No injuries. But a message nonetheless. Katie cried. Tom held her close. You're safe, he said. But he didn't sound sure. The next day, Elijah showed up with plywood and tools. I'll help you fix it, he said. Tom's hands trembled as he took the drill. I used to think I knew this town, he said. But I didn't. Not really. You do now, Elijah said. The question is, what you gonna do with that truth? Word of the shooting spread fast. Then something remarkable happened. The same kids Elijah had saved, their parents came together. Not just with sympathy, but with purpose. They started a community watch. Mixed races, mixed politics, mixed histories. But united. They posted signs. We protect each other here. Hate has no home on this street. Even Rick from the auto shop showed up. I ain't good with speeches, he said. But I know what right looks like. And it looks like this. Meanwhile, Buck wasn't done. Late one night, he and two others crept toward Elijah's garage again. This time, they brought kerosene. But Elijah wasn't sleeping. He'd started keeping a night watch, sitting on his porch, shotgun across his lap, not to shoot, but to see. When the men crept closer, flashlights off, Elijah stood silently and called out. I see you. The men froze. Then floodlights snapped on. Tom and half the community watch had been waiting. Buck dropped the can and ran. The others weren't so lucky. The sheriff arrested them that night. Buck turned himself in the next day, cornered by evidence, and the weight of his own cowardice. At his arraignment, the judge, a stern woman named Charlene Bird, looked him square in the eye. You tried to burn down a man's livelihood because he made your world a little more honest, she said. Well, Mr. Kinley, welcome to a new Willow Creek. Courtroom 2B of the Willow County Courthouse was built in 1903. High ceilings. Wooden benches. Flags that hadn't been replaced in decades. It still smelled faintly of musty paper and floor polish, like old history clinging to relevance. But on this day, history stood trial. Buck Kinley sat at the defense table, flanked by two lawyers paid for by a Citizens Defense Fund, his friends raised through Facebook. He looked smaller now, his once dominant presence deflated by months of scrutiny, surveillance, and shame. Elijah Carter didn't sit in the courtroom. He stood outside under the courthouse steps, in the same work boots he wore during the rescue. The media had begged for a comment. CNN had sent a van. Even local radio wanted a soundbite. He declined them all. I'm not the story, he said. Truth is. Inside, Judge Bird presided with an iron stare. The charges were clear: attempted arson, conspiracy, trespassing, and intimidation with racial motivation. But this trial wasn't just about Buck. It was about Willow Creek. Over the week, witness after witness testified. Tom Harlan, firm and measured. Miss Bernadette, with a calm dignity. A teenager named Louise, who had seen the men sneaking near the garage. Buck's lawyers tried to argue that the actions were misunderstood. That frustration isn't the same as hate. But the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the town. When the guilty verdict was read, a strange silence fell. Not relief. Not triumph. Just gravity. Because justice isn't joy. It's weight. Buck didn't look at Elijah on his way out. He didn't need to. They both knew what had broken, and what might never be fixed. But the trial had done something unexpected. It shook loose the final layer of fear in Willow Creek. People began talking honestly. In churches. On porches. At schools. They talked about old injustices. About black farmers driven off land. About white guilt inherited and buried. About kids learning a history their parents had never dared speak aloud. And in that slow conversation, Elijah found himself at the center again, this time, not as a symbol, but as a voice. The local school board invited him to speak. So did the Historical Society. Then a national education nonprofit asked if they could create a short documentary about his life, about Willow Creek. "I ain't got a movie star smile," he said. But they insisted. And eventually he said yes. The day the camera crew arrived, Elijah sat in his shop, surrounded by wrenches and grease, and said the simplest thing he'd ever said. "You don't need to be brave every day. Just once. And it'll echo longer than hate ever could." But as his words spread, so did danger. Late one evening, just as spring stretched into summer, Tom Harlan drove up to Elijah's garage, pale and shaken. "We got wind of something," he said. "What kind of something?" "Federal agents intercepted chatter online. Some extremist group, outside town, didn't like the verdict. They're planning something. Maybe more than just words." Elijah nodded slowly. "Do I need to leave?" he asked. Tom looked him straight in the eye. "That's up to you. But if you stay, we'll protect you. All of us." And they did. That night, the church bell rang at 9 p.m. It hadn't rung like that since the civil rights days. By 9:15, over 300 people were outside Elijah's garage. Rick brought his whole crew. Miss Bernadette brought food. Katie Harlan held up a hand-drawn sign that read, "We stand with Elijah." Tom organized patrols. The local mosque joined hands with the Baptist church. For once, every building with a steeple or a prayer mat stood as one. The hate group never came. Or if they did, they saw what awaited them, and turned back. Elijah stood on the porch that night, heart heavy, watching a town refuse to be broken again. "I never asked to be a symbol," he told Rick, who leaned against the porch rail, sipping iced tea. "You didn't have to," Rick said. "You just did the right thing. That's rare enough these days." A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from Buck Kinley. The handwriting was tight, rigid. "Elijah, I ain't gonna pretend we'll ever see the world the same. But prison has a way of making a man think. You didn't burn down my home. You didn't lie in court. And somehow, you never spit hate at me, even when I deserved it. That matters. I'm sorry. Buck." Elijah read it 3 times. Then tucked it into his shoebox, next to the thank you notes from the kids he'd saved. Healing, he knew, didn't come all at once. It came like the tide, slow, quiet, but steady. 1 year after the day Elijah Carter jumped into the cold waters of Willow Creek, the town gathered again on that same bridge. This time, there were no protests. No hesitation. Just candles, music, and people, hundreds of them, carrying lanterns like stars fallen to earth. The air was warm. Peaceful. Summer held the town gently in its palms, and the river below moved slow and steady, like it, too, was watching. Mayor Dorsey stood before a small wooden podium, this time without fear in his voice. "A year ago," he said, "our town faced a choice, to stay silent or to speak. To cling to what was, or reach for what could be. We reached." The crowd applauded softly, many with tears in their eyes. Elijah stood beside Tom Harlan, Miss Bernadette, Rick, and a few of the children he'd rescued, now taller, stronger, and more confident. One of them, Xavier, held Elijah's hand. His grip was firm. "You gonna talk?" Xavier whispered. Elijah shook his head. "Tonight ain't about talkin'. It's about listenin'. A choir sang. Bells rang. The bronze plaque that had been installed months earlier at the foot of the bridge gleamed under soft light. In honor of those who leap into waters they don't have to. In honor of those who build, not burn. In honor of the better angels in us all. Dedicated to Elijah Carter, 2024. People were silent, just reading. No fanfare. Just meaning. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to drift away, a woman Elijah had never met approached him. She was white, in her late 60s, with a gentle expression and silver hair pulled into a bun. "My father was one of the men who marched against integration in '62, she said. "He raised me on fear. On rules that divided us. But last year, my grandson came home alive because of you. He's 9. His name's Caleb. He thinks you're a superhero." Elijah smiled gently. "I ain't got no cape." "No," she said, voice trembling. "But you gave us all something to hold on to." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know you don't want awards. But this belonged to my father. His Army medal. He got it for bravery. I think he gave it to the wrong person." Elijah took the box, stunned. "I can't." "You already did." She hugged him. Tight. Not polite. But human. Later that night, the town held a vigil. People lit floating lanterns and released them into the river. Each carried a message written on rice paper: hopes, apologies, dreams. Miss Bernadette said, "For every child who needs to see what love looks like." Rick said, "Thank you for not letting me stay blind." Katie Harlan said, "I want to be brave like you." Tom simply read, "Forgive us." Elijah didn't write anything. He just watched the river carry the lights downstream, like memories floating toward peace. He stood there long after the others had gone home. Alone, but not lonely. Then Rick came back, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "I used to think fixing engines was hard. Turns out, fixing people's harder." Elijah chuckled. "Engines don't talk back." Rick paused. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't jumped?" Elijah looked up at the stars, then down at the water. "Yeah. Every day. And I thank God I did." Rick nodded. "So what now?" Elijah looked across the bridge, the new one, the strong one. "Now," he said, "we keep building. 3 years later, Elijah opened a youth center on the west side. Funded by donations from across the country. It offered trade programs, tutoring, art therapy. On the front wall, a mural showed the old bridge collapsing and the new one rising, held together by outstretched hands of every color. Tom Harlan became sheriff. First in town history elected with a majority vote from both black and white neighborhoods. Rick ran for city council. He won. Miss Bernadette passed away peacefully at 76. Her funeral drew more people than the mayor's inauguration. The grocery store? Rebuilt by her niece and named Bernie's Bridge. As for Buck Kinley? He was released early on parole. Moved to a neighboring town. No one heard much more, except a rumor he started attending AA meetings and asked to speak at a reconciliation circle. Elijah never chased his story. Because heroes don't need statues or medals or headlines. They just need to keep walking, one step at a time, across every bridge worth building.